Welcome to the Money Tree Real Estate Investor Podcast, where we learn from real estate professionals across the industry. They will share about how they got into real estate, the big wins they have celebrated, the mistakes they have made along the way, and the advice they have for anyone following in their footsteps. Money really does grow on trees. Hey everybody, it's William Hollins here for another episode of the Money Tree Real Estate Investor Podcast. Today I've got a special guest. He's a structural engineer. He went to UC Davis. His name is Brian Armstrong. I'll let you go ahead and tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got into the space.
All right, thanks, William. And thanks for having me on the show.
Definitely.
So good introduction. I am a structural engineer. I've been doing so for a little over 20 years. Always been of interest to me. Always enjoyed buildings and watching buildings get created, which I think dovetails well with the multifamily space. Been doing multifamily for a few years and really like the just everything about multifamily and apartments and taking apartments and making them better and creating communities that people really enjoy living in. But happy to talk about that today and anything else related to real estate. One of my favorite topics.
Definitely, yeah. It's one of my favorite things as well. So why did you study engineering?
Well, I always liked math and physics. I know that sounds kind of weird and nerdy, but I liked chemistry a lot as well. That really kind of took to physics as something that made a lot of sense in my brain. It just kind of explained how a lot of things in the universe work. And math always sort of came easier than like the English and the writing and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's kind of what steered me toward engineering. And then I think deep down, I think there was an interest in real estate and buildings all along that I never really recognized, until I'd say, somewhat more recently. But I think that's how the engineering turned into structural engineering related to buildings more than any other type of engineering. That one just seemed the most interesting to me. So,
yeah, that's awesome. I mean, you and I have a lot in common. I studied mechanical engineering. I got my engineering training, so I was on the professional engineering route. And after doing some MEP, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing design work for buildings, I realized that really wasn't the direction that I wanted to go down. So I'm in construction management now, so I get to work pretty closely with you guys on occasion. What types of buildings do you specialize in designing?
Yeah, so
Or
for
structures?
the firm I work for now, we do a lot of commercial buildings, and a big chunk of what we do is actually data centers.
Awesome.
So the hubs of the internet, if you will. And so those tend to be anywhere from like 1 to 4 stories. So not huge buildings, but they have a lot of really complicated infrastructure in them to keep all the servers and everything running smoothly. So there's a lot of aspects to be looked at beyond just structural design, that we need to know about as part of like a complete building system picture. So it sounds somewhat repetitive, and there is a lot of repetition across different projects as far as, big picture stuff, but the nitty-gritty of each project has its own little subtle differences all the time. So it stays very interesting. And because it's sort of technology based more than just like an office building, that has any number of tenants in it, the technology is constantly evolving in what types of systems are implemented and what types of, cooling packages are used, that sort of thing. So it is interesting that even though it's, kind of the same concept over and over again, it's constantly changing and growing, and feel like you're learning a lot every time.
Definitely. That's pretty cool to be on the cutting edge of some of those technologies as well. That's awesome.
Yeah. It's interesting to kind of be a little bit more on the back end of, how does the internet operate? Because, we all just go to a website and click, and it's just there. And where does it all come from? And I don't even fully understand it either,
It's
because I'm just
magic,
a structural
right?
engineer. But it all comes through data centers and servers in data centers, and so it is very interesting stuff.
Yeah, and that's one thing I like about construction is, there's so much communication and from somebody, that didn't have a lot of experience prior to joining Balfour Beatty, it's crazy how much, meetings and coordination and, like when we get the air handling unit weights, like we got to send it to the structural engineer and tell him where it
Sure,
needs to be. And,
sure.
you coordinate so much and it's pretty incredible when you finish a building,
Yeah,
and all
I'm
the,
always
the blood,
amazed at,
sweat and tears that went into it.
yeah, I'm always amazed at how many people and how many thousands of hours it takes to build a building. Um, it's a lot of resources from just human resources to build a building.
Definitely. So I know you wrote an ebook, and I definitely want to talk about that a little bit more. But I'd like to hear your story. So as a somebody with engineering background, I think that as a whole, our community is pretty risk averse, and it makes a lot of sense. We're designing buildings, we're designing aircraft, we're designing things that need to be very, very safe. But what would you say to somebody? Trying to decide if they want to invest in real estate that's maybe an architect, an engineer, or a construction management person.
Yeah, so I think that it's a great industry for people who are interested in investing, really. I mean, because I I think real estate, especially, what I look at in multifamily, but a lot of aspects of commercial real estate, there's self-storage, there's mobile home parks, there's all different aspects. My focus being multifamily. I think that that investment class really offers some of the best returns on a risk adjusted basis, meaning that for people who are tending towards risk aversion in their investments, I think real estate makes a ton of sense. Um, just because you're owning a hard asset, that asset appreciates through, generally two ways. One, forced appreciation by improving the property and therefore being able to charge higher rents. And two, just inflation in general drives rent prices up. It increases the cost of materials. It increases the replacement value of the building. So your value is increasing in multiple different ways. The demand for housing has really never been greater, um, because over the past 15 years since the financial crisis of 2008, so much home construction has been halted for various reasons between then and now, that multifamily apartments are still in very high demand because there isn't enough single family supply to keep up with that market. So you have a situation where you have an undersupply condition, plenty of demand, um, plenty of opportunity for asset value appreciation, and there's some tax benefits as well, which kind of icing on the cake, if you will.
Definitely.
But there's all these reasons why multifamily and commercial real estate makes sense and has a very low risk threshold that really plays well to anybody in the AEC industry who, like you said, as engineers, architects, contractors, we as a community don't want to take a risk on building a building for, whether it be for server cabinets for computers or people. Um, Either way, that building cannot have a risk of collapse. And so you have to have a certain amount of risk tolerance that you'll accept, but that risk tolerance has to be pretty low. And so, you look at some other investments that could offer high returns, um, but all of those investments really have a much higher risk threshold, I think, than what real estate offers for a comparable return. Or you could look at risks, at investments that have lower risk, but all of those tend to come with lower returns, like bonds, for example, lower risk,
Mhm.
but much lower return than what you get out of real estate. So I think it's a great match for an investment type and someone in the AEC community.
That's awesome. So I know before we started recording, we were chatting for a little bit, and you mentioned you started out as an LP, and now you're, partnering on larger deals with other people. What would you say to somebody that has never invested in a as a limited partner on their first deal? What is it going to take to get them over the hump?
Yeah, it's a good question. When I did my LP investment, my first one was years ago. And we actually, my wife met somebody at a family event who who was an LP investor. And real estate had always kind of been something that she and I had chatted about. You know, we read Rich Dad Poor Dad, like so many people have. And it was just one of those things that kind of popped up, and we're like, yeah, this makes sense. Sure, let's give it a try. But it was one of those things that if we hadn't been thinking about real estate, probably wouldn't have gone for it. What makes people get over the hump? I think it's just, it's not an asset class that's really commonly discussed. And I think it feels for a lot of people like something that you have to have a lot of money, like a lot of money, or you have to just, know somebody who knows somebody to get into it. And I think that's a common misconception that it doesn't take being a millionaire to invest in real estate. You don't have to have $1 million+ to do it. Um, you don't have to know somebody who knows somebody. You just have to find a group of people that you think you can trust and has some integrity on owning and operating the investment property, and who is going to do the right thing for investors and for the property to basically return investor capital and whatever sort of returns can be, you know, obtained out of that property. And so a lot of it comes down to education on the side of understanding how a real estate investment works and knowing the finding the right sponsor team, I suppose, that you believe in, and then kind of just having the faith to give it a try. Um, you know, that's people. I hear people make stock investments all the time where it's like, oh, I got a tip from a buddy about a thing, and maybe that's 500 or $1,000, and so it's money that you can afford to just wipe off the map and not worry about it.
Right.
Whereas real estate tends to be higher dollar values, usually 25 to $50,000 minimum. So it's a little less comfortable to just drop 50 G's into a real estate investment. But I think that's where the education piece comes in. And it doesn't take a lot of education. It just sort of takes some understanding. A lot of people have great websites, blogs, podcasts, for example, just hearing about how a transaction operates and how a property is improved and how the returns are created. Just having that education really, I think, is really a missing link for a lot of folks.
Yeah, and you mentioned the stock market. I would say the stock market is, medium to high risk. I mean, we've
Right?
seen in the last few
I agree.
years, I think maybe a lot of people were cheering this on, but we saw the manipulation with the GameStop stock.
Yeah.
So maybe the little guys beat the big guys in that one, in that
Yep.
squeeze.
Yep.
But there's manipulation, for the big guys, beating out the little guys as well. And one thing that I like a lot about real estate is you can't really manipulate like the price of a property. You can't really
Yeah.
manipulate, raising people's rents like exorbitantly because they won't be able to afford it anymore.
Yeah.
And it's like I've lived in apartments for 6 years of my life. I never missed a payment. I had a great community. And when you invest in real estate, like you have real ownership in a real property. And
Yeah.
that real
Mhm.
property is making real money every single month.
Yep.
It's like, man, like we talked about before, like I got exposed to this and I instantly knew like this makes a lot of sense, and I've taken my time, I've educated and I've listened to the podcast and read the books and talked to hundreds of people,
Sure.
from brokers to syndicators to lenders and everybody in between, property managers, attorneys, etc. And I hear success stories all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. That's because there are success stories all the time. It's just kind of getting over that little initial hump of learning enough to feel comfortable. Or maybe it's not even that. Maybe it's learning enough to ask some questions to then feel comfortable.
Hmm.
And I think that it's important if folks are considering real estate, I think it's important to be able to be comfortable asking questions, and to find people that you want to work with that are willing to listen to your questions and spend the time it takes to answer your questions to the
Definitely.
point where your question is answered, not to the point where they think they've answered the question, but to the point where you actually have the answer that you need, or that you've now got another question that you need an answer to there. But it's important to make sure that's the people that you're working with. Because if you're getting brushed off by somebody who doesn't have the time, then it's not going to be a successful relationship, I guess is maybe the way to say it.
Passive investors in real estate are able to receive a check every month. Some people call that mailbox money. We say money really does grow on trees. Visit the website at biggerpictureholdings.com, where we have a ton of free resources to help you learn more about planting your very own money tree.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. So I'd love to hear about your ebook. Tell us what it's called. Maybe tell us about the journey to write it, and kind of stuff that you learned along the way, and why it'd be a good read for listeners.
Sure. Yeah. So it's basically about 7 reasons why real estate investing makes sense in addition to stocks. And so my whole take on it is I'm not going to come on a podcast or write an ebook about why you should sell every last penny that you have in the stock market and invest it all in real estate, because it's not it's not really realistic, because almost everybody has a 401k account in their current employer that is probably largely invested in the stock market, because you only have so many choices, and
Right.
generally real estate is not one of those choices. So
Nope.
to
I've
totally
tried.
diversify out of the stock market is not realistic for most people. But I think it's important for a lot of people to understand this is an option for them. And it's way more accessible than most folks realize. And I think that real estate is a great option for people, whether they're in the AEC community or not, doesn't matter. Just as a diversified asset class to the stock market. Like, you look at what's happening right now, this being November of 2022, the stock market's had a really rough year, but for the 10 years or 12 years, whatever it is prior to this, it's been doing great. But, real estate still in 2022 is holding up its values. Commercial real estate, I should say, because it's different than single family. Those
Mhm.
markets are both real estate, but they're very different real estate markets. And it looks as though multifamily, for the reasons we discussed before, low supply, high demand, etc., is going to continue to hold up in its values into 2023 and beyond. And so if folks have some diversity into real estate, it offers a little bit more overall portfolio diversity than being just in the stock market. And, yes, I guess mutual funds offer diversity within the stock market, but if the whole market's going down, the mutual funds coming down with it. So I lay out 7 reasons plus a bonus reason as to why I think real estate makes a ton of sense for everybody, in addition to their investments that they want to keep in the stock market. And there's, a lot of great reasons. We talked about some, the resistance to inflation, the owning a hard asset, the tax benefits, cash flow, and there's others that folks can check out the book and see some of my other ideas as well. But I just think it makes sense for everybody, really, to look at real estate as an option.
Definitely, that's awesome. So kind of the two things that I like to wrap up episodes with, I like to talk about a mistake that you've heard somebody make in real estate, or some sort of loss that you've experienced in real estate. I don't want the listeners to have rose-colored glasses on. I mean, there's a lot of success and there's a lot of hype around real estate, and I fully believe in real estate. But I just want to kind of temper all that hype. Is there anything that you've experienced, or a deal that maybe you learned something from?
Yeah. I think the thing to probably watch out for most folks is kind of, I think I alluded to it a little bit before, but for one, inexperienced folks, because it does real estate is very straightforward in how it works, but it's not always straightforward in the execution of it. And so I think it's okay to have inexperienced people on a team as long as that team has someone who is experienced, or maybe even a couple people who are experienced, to kind of be able to foresee some challenges coming and navigate through some of those challenges in ways that inexperienced folks may not know. So I think maybe if I lean the question towards the idea of what should folks watch out for, I think that's one of the big things to watch out for, is to make sure that at least somebody on the team has some experience, meaning at least a good number of years doing this and showing a solid track record that they can develop a business plan, purchase an asset, and execute towards that business plan, without going way off the rails.
Right, yeah. So that would be somebody that has been able to purchase properties, operate those properties, and then sell the properties and take them full cycle, and meet or exceed the expectations for investor returns.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And even if they haven't, that's the ideal, I think, to have a few of those full cycle transactions under your belt. Even if I would say, that folks have, let's say 4 to 5 years experience, they haven't done an exit quite yet. I still think if they've proven through that 4 and 5 years that they can track to their projections and or beat their projections, I think that's evidence enough that they know what they're doing.
Definitely, yeah. No, I agree with that as well. So last thing, I want to shine the spotlight on you. I want to hear about one of the biggest wins, one of the best things that you've experienced in real estate, and just something you're really proud of.
Okay. It's interesting. One of our, I have been an LP investor, as I mentioned. After that, my wife and I did a few live-in flips where we basically owned a house and flipped it while we lived in it and then sold it and moved on to something else. In one of those, we actually, it is very specific to San Francisco, but we bought a 2-unit building, and we did what's called a condo conversion to it. And that's not specific to San Francisco, but the way that it's done in San Francisco is very specific to San Francisco. On the 2-unit deals, you can kind of fast track your way through. Larger than that, you have to get into the lottery system. It turns into this whole mess. So we bought a place that was built in the 60s. Everything was original to the 60s. I mean, the carpet had been worn down to the mat.
Shag carpet.
And they had used the life out of that carpet. So anyway, we replaced all the finishes. We did a kitchen remodel, bathrooms, all that kind of stuff, fixed up all the inside. So we did the interior remodel and did the condo conversion at the same time, all in the span of about 2 years, a little over 2 years. And so the reason to do a condo conversion in San Francisco is because it drives the value of the unit up, right? Now you have your own condo instead of buying half of a building. And so in the end, we actually netted over $500,000 in proceeds from that transaction and spent not very much, relatively speaking. I mean, I think the condo conversion itself probably costs $15,000 and the renovations were like $60,000 or something like that. So that was one of the better ones. Haven't been able to quite replicate that magnitude yet, but that was a pretty big win. That actually got us into the neighborhood where we live now, and that was kind of a big jump from where we were before. So
that's pretty awesome. Cool. That's exciting. I love to hear the success stories and wins of people using and improving real estate.
Power of real estate. It's a powerful thing when done right.
Yes, sir. Well, hey, it was really great to have you on as a guest, and definitely want to hear more of your story later on down the road.
Yeah, for sure. I really appreciate you having me on today.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you.
All right.
Like and subscribe below. A new episode will air every Tuesday at 7 a.m. Are you looking for more content? Visit our website, biggerpictureholdings.com. And remember, money really does grow on trees.